My name is Marcus Webb, and for the past 11 years, I've worked as an aviation archivist for the Federal Aviation Administration. My job is about as exciting as it sounds, reviewing flight data, cross-referencing maintenance logs, ensuring that the countless terabytes of information generated by commercial aviation each day are properly stored, catalogued, and accessible for safety reviews. I've seen my share of anomalies, data corruption from electromagnetic interference, GPS glitches near military installations, the occasional pilot report that doesn't quite line up with recorded telemetry. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what landed on my desk on a cold Tuesday morning in March. The email's subject line read, "Priority Review, Unexplained Data Absence, Multiple Systems." I opened it expecting another bureaucratic wild goose chase. Maybe a server failure during a routine backup. Perhaps a time zone error in the logging software. Instead, I found myself staring at a synchronization map that made absolutely no sense. 47 minutes. That's how long the gap lasted. From 22:17 UTC to 23:04 UTC on March 14th, an entire sector of sky over the North Atlantic went completely unrecorded. Not just by one system, but by every system pointed at it. Weather satellites maintained by NOAA showed nothing but blank frames. Air traffic control radar displayed empty space where it should have shown atmospheric conditions. The European Space Agency's orbital observation platform recorded zero data during that window. Even private astronomical databases showed the same impossible absence. At first, I assumed it was a coordinated system failure. Maybe a solar flare had caused simultaneous electromagnetic disruption across multiple platforms. But the metadata logs showed all systems functioning normally, power supplies stable, transmission protocols operating within standard parameters. Data was being received, processed, and stored, except there was nothing to store. The recorded files existed. They had proper timestamps, correct file sizes, and valid format structures. But when you opened them, they contained only darkness. Not static, not corruption artifacts, just pure absolute black. As if for 47 minutes, that section of sky had simply ceased to exist in any recordable form. I pulled up the coordinates. The affected zone stretched across approximately 300 nautical miles of airspace, centered at 48 degrees north latitude, 32 degrees west longitude. Open ocean. No landmass, no known atmospheric phenomena. Just empty Atlantic sky. But here's what made my hands start shaking as I scrolled through the report. During those 47 minutes, 7 commercial aircraft had flown directly through that airspace. Their flight data recorders had logged the entire journey. Altitude, airspeed, heading, engine performance, all normal. All normal, except for one thing. None of their external cameras had captured anything. Chapter 1. The flight that logged nothing. Transatlantic cargo, Flight 972, departed London. Heathrow at 21:45 UTC, bound for New York's JFK International Airport. A Boeing 767 freighter carrying automotive parts and pharmaceutical supplies. Standard route. Experienced crew. Perfect weather conditions. The aircraft entered the affected airspace at 22:19 UTC, 2 minutes after the blackout began. I obtained clearance to review the complete flight data recorder package. Every commercial aircraft maintains multiple recording systems. The famous black box that survives crashes, plus digital flight data recorders, cockpit voice recorders, and increasingly external monitoring cameras, used for post-flight maintenance review. The internal systems showed exactly what you'd expect. Autopilot engaged, altitude holding steady at 37,000 feet, airspeed consistent at 480 knots, engine temperatures normal, fuel consumption within projected parameters. The cockpit voice recorder captured routine communication between the pilots and air traffic control. Weather updates, position reports, a brief conversation about coffee. But the external cameras, 4 of them positioned to monitor the wings, tail section and forward fuselage, showed nothing but solid black for exactly 47 minutes. Not the darkness of night sky. I've reviewed thousands of hours of night flight footage. You can always see something. The faint glow of wingtip navigation lights reflecting off the aircraft's surface. The subtle distinction between dark sky and darker ocean below. Stars if conditions are clear. The distant lights of other aircraft. This was different. This was the complete absence of light, as if the cameras had been covered or the aircraft was flying through some kind of void where electromagnetic radiation simply did not exist. Yet the pilots reported normal visibility throughout the flight. I cross-referenced the other 6 flights that passed through the zone during the blackout window. Lufthansa, Air France, an Emirates cargo flight, 2 private business jets, a positioning ferry flight for a maintenance crew. Every single one showed the same phenomenon. Internal systems functioning perfectly. External visual recording showing absolute darkness. But it got stranger. I pulled the radar tracking data from air traffic control. The aircraft all appeared exactly where they should be. Their transponders broadcast position, altitude, and identification codes without interruption. Ground-based radar painted their returns clearly. The aircraft were there. We could track them. We could communicate with them. Their instruments worked. Their pilots saw normally, but somehow the sky around them had become invisible to every recording device. I began making calls, first to the maintenance division, to rule out a bizarre coincidence of camera failures. They ran diagnostics on all 7 aircraft. The cameras were functioning perfectly. They checked calibration logs and maintenance records. No issues found. Next, I contacted the National Weather Service. Had there been any unusual atmospheric conditions over the North Atlantic that night? Any phenomenon that could interfere with optical recording systems while leaving human vision and radar unaffected? The meteorologist I spoke with, a patient woman named Jennifer Kowalski, who'd been analysing atmospheric data for 23 years, was baffled. There was a high-pressure system over the region, she told me, her voice crackling through the phone line. Clear skies, minimal cloud cover, visibility excellent. Whatever caused your camera blackout, it wasn't weather. Could it be some kind of electromagnetic interference? I asked, grasping for rational explanations. Electromagnetic interference would affect radar and radio communication, she replied. You said those systems worked fine, and it wouldn't create uniform darkness across optical recording systems. It would create noise, distortion, maybe ghost images, not pure black. She paused, and I heard papers rustling in the background. Marcus, I pulled our satellite data for that time frame. We maintain continuous monitoring of the North Atlantic for weather tracking and climate research. Our satellites cover that region from multiple angles. And I felt my pulse quickening. We have the same gap, 47 minutes of nothing. The satellites were functioning. They recorded data before and after, but during that window, it's like they were pointed at a wall. No atmospheric readings, no cloud patterns, no sea surface temperature data, just blank frames. I thanked her and hung up, staring at my computer screen. 7 aircraft, multiple satellites, ground-based systems, all showing the same impossible absence. What could cause that? More importantly, what would want to? Chapter 2. Pilot Testimony. Protocol required me to interview the flight crews. I started with Transatlantic 972, since their aircraft had spent the longest duration inside the affected zone. Captain Richard Morrison had been flying commercial routes for 19 years. His co-pilot, Emily Rodriguez, had 14 years of experience. Both held impeccable safety records. Neither had any history of filing unusual incident reports or making unreliable observations. I met them at a coffee shop near JFK, away from official channels. Sometimes people are more willing to share strange details in informal settings. Morrison was in his early 50s with the calm demeanour that comes from thousands of hours in a cockpit. Rodriguez was younger, sharper in her mannerisms, the kind of pilot who noticed everything. "You want to know about the Atlantic crossing?" Morrison said. Not as a question. Word had apparently spread among the crews. Specifically, the section between 2217 and 2304 UTC, I confirmed. "Did you notice anything unusual?" They exchanged a glance. Morrison spoke first. "The sky was wrong." "Wrong how?" He struggled for words, his hands moving as if he could shape the explanation physically. "You know how, when you're flying at night, there's always some kind of movement. Even in perfectly clear conditions, you see atmospheric distortion. Heat gradients causing slight shimmer. The way starlight bends through different air density layers. The sense of depth when you look out at the sky." "It's subtle," Rodriguez added, "but it's always there. Your brain uses those tiny visual cues to understand the space around you." "And that night?" I prompted. "Nothing," Morrison said flatly. The sky was perfectly still, like looking at a painted backdrop. Stars visible, but they didn't twinkle. No shimmer. No sense of atmosphere between us and them. Rodriguez leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. It was like flying through a photograph. Everything looked normal, but it felt wrong, artificial. I kept checking our instruments because I thought maybe we were in some kind of controlled descent or the autopilot had malfunctioned, but everything was reading normal. "How long did this last?" "Maybe 45 minutes, Morrison shrugged. "We didn't time it exactly. It was one of those things where you notice it. It makes you uncomfortable, but you can't quite articulate why. So you don't say anything, because you don't want to sound crazy." "But you both noticed it," I said. "Eventually, yes," Rodriguez confirmed. "About 20 minutes into that stretch, I finally asked Richard if the sky looked strange to him. He said he'd been thinking the same thing, but didn't want to mention it." I made notes, underlining the word "still" 3 times. "Did you see any other aircraft during this time?" "One," Morrison said. "A Lufthansa flight passed about 4,000 feet above us, heading the opposite direction. We saw their navigation lights clearly." "Did their aircraft look normal?" Another exchanged glance. Rodriguez answered. "The lights looked normal, but the aircraft itself, it was like it was moving through oil." "No, that's not right. Moving through frozen space. I don't know how to describe it." "Like it wasn't displacing air," Morrison said quietly. "Like it was just sliding through a fixed medium." I interviewed the other crews over the following week. The Lufthansa captain, a precise German pilot named Hans Weber, used almost identical language. "The air was too still," he told me. "No turbulence, no sense of motion, like flying through a vacuum." The Air France crew had been so unsettled that they filed a maintenance report after landing, convinced something was wrong with their cockpit windows. The investigation found nothing. The Emirates cargo pilot, a former military aviator with combat experience, was more direct. "I've flown through sandstorms, monsoons, and volcanic ash clouds, he said. This felt more wrong than all of those. Something was out there. I don't know what, but something was watching us fly through its space. That word kept appearing in the interviews. Still. Fixed, frozen, artificial. As if the pilots had all flown through the same impossible environment, and their brains, lacking proper vocabulary for the experience, kept circling around the same inadequate descriptions. But the most disturbing detail came from Emily Rodriguez during a follow-up call. "There's something I didn't mention in the interview," she said, her voice low. "Something I noticed but convinced myself I had imagined." "What was it?" "The stars," she said. "They were in the wrong positions, just slightly. Like someone had repainted the constellations from memory, but got the details a little bit off. I'm not an astronomer, but I know the major star patterns you see over the Atlantic at night. They were wrong. Not by much, but wrong." "Why didn't you mention this before?" A long silence. Then, "Because it sounds insane. Because it suggests that whatever we flew through was showing us an imitation of the sky, and I really, really don't want that to be true." I thanked her and ended the call, adding another note to my growing file. Reported astronomical inconsistency. Pilots perceived artificial recreation of night sky. The implications were staggering. If the pilots were right, they hadn't just flown through an area with unusual atmospheric conditions. They'd flown through something that was actively creating a visual simulation of normal sky, presumably to avoid detection. But detection by whom? The pilots saw the fake sky. Only our instruments saw the truth, the absolute darkness, the complete absence of recordable light. Unless the darkness was the fake part, and the pilots saw what was really there. Something vast enough to fill 300 miles of sky, sophisticated enough to generate a convincing visual simulation, but unable or unwilling to fool our recording devices. Chapter 3. The Observatory Failure. My investigation had attracted attention. 3 weeks after my initial report, I received a secured message from the National Science Foundation requesting a meeting. They didn't specify the subject, but the classification level told me everything I needed to know. The meeting took place at a government building in Arlington, Virginia. No signs indicated which agency operated out of the facility. I was escorted through 2 security checkpoints by silent staff who checked my credentials with the efficiency of people who did this dozens of times daily. The conference room was windowless and empty, except for a table, 6 chairs, and a secure computer terminal. I was left alone for 7 minutes. I timed it before 2 people entered. The first was a woman in her 60s carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone who had spent decades being the smartest person in the room. She introduced herself simply as Denton. No first name offered. The second was younger, male, with the slightly dishevelled appearance of someone who lived more comfortably in observatories than offices. He said his name was Ramirez. "Mr. Webb," Denton began, sitting across from me with the posture of someone conducting an interrogation. "Your report on the North Atlantic data absence crossed our desk because you flagged it for multi-system correlation." That was smart. Most analysts would have treated it as isolated equipment failures. "It clearly wasn't equipment failure," I replied. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. Which brings us to why you're here. Show him," she said to Ramirez. The younger man opened a laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed what appeared to be telescope imaging data, dense with technical annotations I didn't fully understand. "This is from the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii," Ramirez explained. His voice carried the slight hesitation of someone unused to briefing outsiders. "One of the most powerful astronomical observation facilities in the world. Multiple telescopes, including infrared and optical arrays capable of detecting objects billions of light years away. He clicked through several screens of data. On March 14th, one of our telescopes was conducting a routine deep space observation survey. The targeting system automatically scans predetermined sky sectors, collecting data for ongoing research projects. Another click. A star field appeared, dense with distant galaxies. At 22:17 UTC, our optical telescope was pointed at coordinates 48 degrees north declination, 32 degrees west right ascension, the same region as your North Atlantic airspace. He didn't need to tell me what came next. The telescope recorded 47 minutes of nothing, I said. Correct. Not sky, not stars, not background cosmic radiation. Nothing. As if space itself was temporarily not there. Ramirez pulled up technical readouts. The telescope was functioning perfectly. We verified all systems. The targeting coordinates were correct. The exposure settings were appropriate. The sensor arrays showed normal operation. But you recorded darkness, I said, feeling a chill despite the room's climate control. We recorded absence, Denton corrected. There's a difference. Darkness is the lack of light. This was the lack of anything. No electromagnetic radiation at any wavelength. No gravitational lensing effects. No background microwave radiation. It's as if someone cut a 300-mile hole in the universe and left it empty. She let that sink in before continuing. We initially assumed a local obstruction, a cloud bank perhaps, or some kind of atmospheric phenomenon obscuring the view. But Mauna Kea is 13,000 feet above sea level, with some of the clearest skies on Earth, and our weather monitoring showed perfect conditions. So you checked other observatories, I guessed. Ramirez nodded. 7 different facilities were conducting observations that might have included that sky sector during the blackout window. Different telescopes, different research projects, different imaging technologies. Every single one recorded the same absence. He showed me the data, observatory after observatory, all showing the same impossible gap. Optical telescopes, radio telescopes, infrared arrays, all pointing at slightly different angles, covering different portions of the sky, but all intersecting with that specific region during those 47 minutes, all recording nothing. What about after the blackout ended, I asked. Did the sky return to normal? Immediately, Denton said. At 23:04 UTC, all systems simultaneously began recording normal sky, stars in their proper positions, background radiation at expected levels, cosmic microwave background unchanged, as if nothing had happened. Except you can verify that something did happen, I said, because you have before and after data showing the same sky sector. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. She nodded to Ramirez, who pulled up a comparison image. 2 star fields appeared side by side, dense with points of light. They looked identical to my untrained eye. These are the same sky sector, Ramirez explained, captured 6 hours apart, one before the blackout, one after. Every star is exactly where it should be, accounting for Earth's rotation and proper motion. So nothing changed, I said. Correct, which means whatever blocked our view wasn't an object passing between Earth and those stars. If it were, we'd expect to see stellar positions shifted slightly due to gravitational lensing, or perhaps some stars would be occluded, while others remained visible, creating an irregular edge to the darkened region. Instead, you got uniform absence, I said, beginning to understand. Uniform and complete, Denton confirmed, as if something created a perfect sphere of non-space, temporarily removing that region from observable reality. not blocking it, removing it. The implications rattled around in my head. You're saying this wasn't something between us and the stars. This was something that temporarily replaced that section of space with, what, a void? We don't know what to call it, Ramirez admitted. The physics don't make sense. You can't just remove space. Space isn't a substance you can cut out. It's the framework in which everything exists. Unless you're operating from outside that framework, Denton said quietly. The room fell silent. Outside, I heard the muffled sound of footsteps in the hallway. Normal people doing normal government work, completely unaware that in this windowless conference room, we were discussing the possibility that something had temporarily deleted part of the universe. There's one more thing, Denton said, her tone suggesting this was the real reason I'd been brought here. We need to coordinate our data with yours because our observations show something your aviation data doesn't. We can verify the exact moment the blackout began and ended, precise to the millisecond. And, I prompted. The edge was perfect, Ramirez said, pulling up a time series graph. When space returned, it didn't fade in gradually or flicker. It was instantaneous across the entire region. Imagine a 300-mile sphere of nothing suddenly switching to normal space at the exact same moment, at every point on its surface. That's impossible, I said reflexively. Yes, Denton agreed. According to our understanding of physics, coordinating an instantaneous change across 300 miles would require faster-than-light communication or instantaneous action at a distance. Both violate special relativity. Which means either our understanding of physics is incomplete, Ramirez said, or whatever did, this doesn't operate according to the same physical laws we do. I thought about the pilot's testimony, the artificial stillness of the sky, the sense of something watching. Did your telescopes record anything before the blackout? Any approach? Any object moving into position? Nothing, Ramirez said. We reviewed all data from 6 hours before. The sky was normal, and then suddenly it wasn't. No transition, no warning, just an instantaneous switch from normal space to absent space. And when it ended, same thing. Absent space to normal space in less than a millisecond. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was being told. So something created a 300-mile sphere of non-space in the middle of the Atlantic sky, maintained it for exactly 47 minutes, then removed it instantaneously. No approach detected, no departure recorded. It just appeared and disappeared. That's one interpretation, Denton said carefully. What's another? She exchanged a glance with Ramirez before answering. That it was always there. That what we perceived as appearance and disappearance was actually the object turning whatever field generates this effect on and off. Like a light switch, but instead of controlling photons, it controls the presence or absence of observable space. The suggestion hung in the air like a physical weight. You're saying it might still be there, I said slowly. Right now, we just can't see it. We're saying we don't know, Denton replied, and that terrifies us more than any other explanation. Chapter 4. The Military Satellite Cross-Check. My security clearance was upgraded 3 days after the observatory meeting. I didn't request it. The authorization simply appeared in my credentials, along with access codes to classified databases I didn't know existed. A new contact materialized in my email. Colonel Patricia Hardwick, United States Space Force. Her message was brief. You're read into Skywatch. Report to Facility 77 for briefing. Come alone. Facility 77 turned out to be a nondescript building at Andrews Air Force Base. I was met at the entrance by a young airman who checked my credentials twice before escorting me through a maze of corridors to an elevator that descended far deeper than I expected. The briefing room was larger than the one in Arlington, with multiple screens displaying real-time satellite telemetry. Colonel Hardwick was waiting, along with two civilians I didn't recognize, and a tech sergeant working at a control station. Hardwick was in her early 40s, with the bearing of someone who had earned her rank through competence rather than politics. She got straight to the point. "Mr. Webb, we've been tracking your investigation into the North Atlantic incident. The data you've compiled matches our own observations, which is why you're here. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest level. You'll sign documents before you leave. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded to the tech sergeant, who brought up a global map on the main screen. Dozens of icons represented military satellites in various orbits. "We maintain continuous orbital surveillance," Hardwick explained. "Communication satellites, GPS constellation, weather monitoring, reconnaissance assets, missile warning systems, hundreds of platforms operating across multiple spectrums." Another screen activated, showing satellite imagery. "These are captures from one of our reconnaissance satellites, KH-13 series. Optical resolution sufficient to read license plates from orbit. It passed over the North Atlantic at 22:31 UTC on March 14th. The image showed ocean and clouds, rendered in the stark clarity of military-grade optics. "This is what we should have seen," Hardwick continued. The image zoomed to a specific region. "And this is what we actually recorded." The screen changed. Where detailed ocean imagery should have been, there was only smooth blackness, perfectly circular, like someone had punched a hole in the photograph. "At first we assumed cloud cover," one of the civilians said. He introduced himself as Peterson, some kind of intelligence analyst. "But the shape was too perfect. Natural cloud formations don't create 300-mile circles." "So you checked other satellites," I said, the pattern becoming familiar. "Every asset we had in position," Hardwick confirmed. "Optical, infrared, synthetic aperture radar, SIGINT platforms. 14 different satellites passed over that region during the 47-minute window." She nodded to the tech sergeant, who displayed a compilation. Satellite after satellite, different imaging technologies, different orbital paths, all showing the same circular void. "The infrared satellites are particularly interesting," Peterson said, highlighting one image. "Infrared detects heat signatures. Ocean surface temperature is usually around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit in that region. Clouds appear cooler. Aircraft are warm points moving through cooler environment." The infrared image showed exactly what he described: the subtle heat patterns of ocean surface, the cooler signatures of cloud formations. Except for one region, rendered in absolute zero. Not cold, zero. The complete absence of thermal signature. "That's not possible," I said. "Everything above absolute zero emits infrared radiation." "Correct," Peterson agreed, "which means either that region was somehow at absolute zero temperature, which would freeze the entire ocean and atmosphere, or it wasn't emitting any radiation at all. Or your satellites weren't detecting what was actually there," I suggested. "That's our working theory," Hardwick said. "Something was present in that location, something large enough to create a 300-mile spherical zone, and either it was actively blocking all forms of electromagnetic detection, or it was making itself invisible through some mechanism we don't understand." The second civilian, a woman who'd been silent until now, spoke up. She was younger, maybe early 30s, with the intense focus of a career scientist. "I'm Chen, aerospace physicist. What Colonel Hardwick isn't saying directly is that we've run every possible analysis on this data. Every conventional explanation fails." She pulled up a technical document on one of the screens. Natural phenomena we can rule out: atmospheric, geological, astronomical. Equipment failure we can rule out. Too many independent systems showing the same readings. Coordinated spoofing or hacking we can rule out. Our satellites use different frequencies, encryptions and protocols. There's no single attack vector that could compromise all of them simultaneously. Which leaves unconventional explanations, I said. Extraordinarily unconventional, Chen confirmed. We're looking at technology so advanced that it can create what appears to be a localized absence of observable reality across multiple detection spectrums simultaneously. Not jamming, not stealth, actual absence. Hardwick pulled up another image. This is from our missile warning satellite. It monitors the entire planet in infrared, watching for the heat signature of rocket launches. At 22:43 UTC, it detected something. The global heat map showed the familiar patterns of human civilization. Bright spots of cities, dimmer regions of rural areas, the cool darkness of oceans. But in the Atlantic, there was a cold spot. Not dark, cold. A circular region showing temperature readings far below the ambient ocean surface. -200 degrees Fahrenheit, Chen said quietly. At least that's what the sensor recorded, which is impossible. That temperature would freeze everything. Water, air, probably even the sensor beam itself. But the satellite registered it, and 6 minutes later, the cold spot disappeared. At the end of the 47 minutes, I guessed. Exactly. Whatever this was, it briefly became visible to our infrared early warning system, showed an impossible temperature, then vanished when the blackout ended. I studied the images, my mind trying to construct a framework that could explain what I was seeing. You mentioned SIGINT satellites, communications intelligence. Did they detect anything? Peterson smiled grimly. We were wondering when you'd ask that. Yes, 3 of our signals intelligence platforms were in position during the event. They monitor radio frequencies, looking for transmissions, communications, electronic emissions. He pulled up a different display. This one showing spectral analysis graphs I barely understood. For 47 minutes, that region of sky was absolutely silent. No radio transmissions, no radar emissions, no electronic signatures whatsoever. Not even the normal background electromagnetic noise you'd expect from Earth's ionosphere and atmospheric electrical activity. Radio silence across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, Chen elaborated, from long-wave radio through microwave, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, and into X-ray frequencies. Every frequency we can monitor showed the same thing. Nothing, except, Peterson added, pulling up another graph, at the very end. In the last 30 seconds before the blackout ended, one of our satellites detected a brief pulse, single frequency, very high energy, lasted less than 2 seconds. The graph showed a sharp spike, a sudden peak amid otherwise flat readings. What frequency? I asked. That's classified, Hardwick said firmly, but I can tell you it's not a frequency used by any known terrestrial technology. Natural astronomical sources don't emit at that frequency. It appears to be artificial, deliberate, and extraordinarily powerful. Like a signal, I said. Potentially, or a power discharge, or a scanning beam. We don't know. I looked at the assembled data, the impossible readings from multiple satellite systems, all pointing to the same conclusion. So you're telling me that for 47 minutes, something created a 300-mile sphere of non-space over the Atlantic Ocean. This object blocked all forms of electromagnetic detection, showed an impossible infrared signature when briefly visible, and emitted a high-energy pulse at an unknown frequency just before disappearing. That's our assessment, Hardwick confirmed. And you're telling me this why? Because 2 days ago, she said, her expression hardening, it's happened again. Different location, same duration, and this time we were ready to measure it properly. She pulled up new imagery. Pacific Ocean, somewhere near the equator, the same circular void, the same perfect absence across multiple satellite systems. Same characteristics, I asked. Identical. 300-mile sphere, 47-minute duration, complete electromagnetic silence, followed by a brief pulse just before termination. But this time, we had additional sensors in place, and we recorded something that changes everything. She nodded to Chen, who pulled up a data set I didn't recognize. Complex mathematical formulae scrolled across the screen. Gravitational wave detectors, Chen explained. We have several platforms capable of detecting minute distortions in space-time. During the second event, we detected gravitational anomalies consistent with the presence of extraordinarily dense matter. How dense? If our readings are accurate, the object has mass comparable to a small moon, compressed into a relatively small volume. The gravitational field should be tearing apart the atmosphere, creating tidal effects in the ocean below, potentially even affecting Earth's orbit. But none of that happened, I said. No, Chen confirmed, which suggests the object is somehow containing or negating its own gravitational effects, which is, according to known physics, impossible. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. There's going to be a third event, Hardwick finally said. We've identified a pattern in the locations and timing. If our projections are correct, it will occur in 9 days. And when it does, every sensor we can bring to bear will be watching. She looked at me directly. You're part of the observation team now, Mr. Webb. Whatever this is, we need every perspective we can get. Your aviation data, combined with observatory records and our satellite intelligence, gives us the most complete picture anyone has ever had of this phenomenon. What do you think it is? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Hardwick exchanged glances with her team before responding. Something that doesn't want to be seen, but occasionally can't help it. Something that observes Earth from orbit, using technology so advanced that it can make itself invisible across every spectrum we can detect. And something that's been doing this for a very long time without us noticing. Until now, I said. Until now, she agreed. The question is, why did it want us to notice? Chapter 5. The Time Drift Discovery. The pattern analysis team consisted of 12 specialists from various agencies, all now working under the classified designation Skywatch. We were given offices in the underground facility at Andrews, with access to computing resources that could process astronomical amounts of data. My specific assignment was to correlate the aviation data with the satellite observations, looking for any additional anomalies that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation. I spent 3 days reviewing flight recorder data from the 7 aircraft that had passed through the first blackout zone, cross-referencing every sensor reading with ground-based and orbital measurements. That's when I found the time discrepancy. It was subtle, so subtle that it had been classified as instrument error in the original data review. But when I plotted the timestamps from multiple aircraft crossing the same airspace, a pattern emerged. Aircraft clocks ran slow during the blackout. Not by much. The discrepancy averaged only 8 seconds across the 47-minute window, but it was consistent across all 7 flights. And more importantly, it correlated precisely with the duration each aircraft spent inside the affected zone. An aircraft that crossed straight through the centre, spending the full 47 minutes in the zone, showed an 8-second lag. An aircraft that just clipped the edge, spending only 20 minutes inside, showed a 3-second lag. The ratio was constant. I brought my findings to Chen, who immediately understood the implications. Time dilation, she said, pulling up my data on her workstation. The aircraft clocks were measuring proper time as experienced by the aircraft itself. But relative to the ground, they were moving through a region where time flowed differently. How is that possible? Strong gravitational fields cause time dilation, she explained, calling up the gravitational wave data. We detected mass equivalent to a small moon. That level of gravitational intensity would definitely affect the flow of time in its vicinity. But you said the gravitational effects were somehow contained, I objected. The ocean didn't experience tidal forces. The atmosphere wasn't disrupted. If gravity was strong enough to cause time dilation, shouldn't we have seen those other effects? You're right, she admitted. The effects are inconsistent. It's like the object was selectively applying gravitational influence, strong enough to warp time, but not strong enough to affect matter, which again violates our understanding of how gravity works. She began running calculations, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Let me check something. If we assume the time dilation is real, and the gravitational effects are being artificially suppressed or directed, yes, here it is. A graph appeared showing the relationships between time dilation and gravitational field strength. According to these numbers, the gravitational field strength required to produce 8 seconds of time dilation over 47 minutes would be approximately 0.02% of Earth's surface gravity. Barely noticeable, certainly not enough to explain the massive gravitational waves we detected. So the time dilation can't be caused by the gravitational field you measured, I said. Not naturally, no, but if something was artificially manipulating space-time, creating a gravitational effect for one purpose, while simultaneously creating time dilation for another purpose, then the inconsistency makes sense. It's not natural physics, it's engineered physics. I sat down, trying to wrap my head around the implications. You're saying this object can selectively control different aspects of space-time, use gravity to hold position or whatever it needs mechanically, but independently control time flow for other reasons. That's one interpretation. Another is that time dilation is a side effect of whatever makes the object invisible. Maybe the field that blocks electromagnetic radiation also affects temporal flow. Or, I suggested quietly, the time dilation is intentional. Maybe whatever this is wants to experience our time differently, slow it down, observe us in more detail. Chen stopped typing and looked at me. That's a disturbing thought. It fits, though. An observation platform that can make itself invisible, that periodically becomes active for exactly 47 minutes, and that experiences time at a slightly different rate than normal. Like someone watching a video at 0.99 playback speed. Everything looks normal, but you see slightly more detail because everything's moving just a little slower. We need to check the satellite data, Chen said, already pulling up files. If time dilation affected the aircraft, it should have affected the satellites too. They all pass through the same region. It took us 6 hours to analyze the satellite data properly. The atomic clocks used in military satellites are extraordinarily precise, accurate to within nanoseconds. Any time discrepancy would be recorded. And there it was. Every satellite that passed through the blackout zone showed microscopic timing offsets, billionths of a second, but present and measurable. The offsets correlated exactly with the duration each satellite spent in the affected region. It's like the entire zone is slightly out of sync with the rest of the universe, Chen said, staring at the data. Not enough to notice without precise instruments, but enough to measure if you're looking for it. I pulled up the data from the second event, the Pacific Ocean occurrence that had happened 2 days earlier. Let me check something. The satellite passes from the second event showed the same pattern. Time offsets proportional to transit duration through the zone. Both events produced time dilation, I confirmed. Same ratio, same effect. Whatever this is, it's consistent. Or it's the same object, Chen suggested. Same technology, same operational parameters, just repositioned to a different location. That possibility led us to the next obvious question. If the object was moving between locations, could we track its trajectory? We plotted the 2 known positions and the time interval between events. The Atlantic occurrence on March 14th at approximately 48 degrees north, 32 degrees west. The Pacific occurrence on April 2nd at approximately 0 degrees latitude, 178 degrees west longitude. 19 days apart, 7,000 miles apart. If it's the same object moving between these positions, I said, working through the math, it would need to travel at about 15,000 miles per hour. That's faster than our fastest satellites, but not impossibly fast. Or it didn't travel at all, Chen suggested. Maybe it teleported, instantaneously moved from one location to another. If you can manipulate space-time enough to create time dilation and gravitational anomalies, who's to say you can't fold space and step from one point to another? Let's not jump to science fiction, I said, though I was acutely aware that we'd crossed that line several implausibilities ago. Chen smiled grimly. Mr. Webb, we're analysing time dilation effects from an invisible moon mass object that appears and disappears at will. We left science fiction behind weeks ago. Now we're just trying to figure out which science fiction is actually reality. She pulled up the projection for the third predicted event. According to our pattern analysis, the next occurrence should be in 6 days. Indian Ocean. Coordinates 10 degrees south, 75 degrees east. If we're right about the timing, it will happen at approximately 1800 UTC and last for 47 minutes. And we'll be watching, I said. With every instrument we have, she confirmed, including several that don't officially exist. If this thing produces time dilation, we're going to measure it with enough precision to understand exactly what it's doing to space-time. She paused, looking at the constellation of data points on her screen. You know what scares me most about all this? What? The precision, the consistency. This isn't random. This isn't some natural phenomenon we've never seen before. This is deliberate, planned, executed with perfect accuracy across multiple events. Whatever's doing, this has done it before, probably hundreds or thousands of times. Then why are we only noticing now? That's the question that keeps me awake at night, Chen said softly. Either our detection capabilities have recently improved enough to finally catch something that's always been there, or what? Or it wants us to notice. For some reason, after however long it's been observing us invisibly, it decided to let us see just enough to know something's there, not enough to understand it, just enough to know we're being watched. The lights in the facility seemed dimmer suddenly, the walls more confining. Somewhere far above us, normal people were going about their normal lives, completely unaware that their reality had become much stranger and more dangerous than they could imagine. And in 6 days, if our predictions were correct, we would watch it happen again. Chapter 6. The Amateur Radio Signals. The break came from an unexpected source. Amateur radio operators, ham radio enthusiasts, hobbyists who maintain networks of radio communication, as a backup to internet-dependent systems. Thousands of them worldwide, constantly transmitting, listening, logging contacts. One of them, a retired electrical engineer named Gordon Matthews in Auckland, New Zealand, had been compiling a database of unusual radio propagation events. He'd been doing it for 30 years, meticulously logging instances where radio signals behaved in unexpected ways, unusual skip distances, strange echoes, anomalous interference. He'd posted about a bizarre event on an amateur radio forum. On March 14th, during a scheduled contact with another operator in South Africa, his transmission had echoed back to him. Not immediately, but delayed by approximately 3 minutes. The forum discussion would have stayed buried in hobbyist archives, except that one of the Skywatch analysts, a former Navy radio operator named Thomas Kim, monitored these forums as part of his job. He saw Matthew's post and flagged it. "The timing matches," Kim said during our morning briefing. Matthews was transmitting at 22:33 UTC, right in the middle of our first blackout window. "Radio signals don't echo like that," I said, though I was learning to stop declaring things impossible. "Actually, they can," Kim explained. "Under certain atmospheric conditions, radio waves can bounce between the ionosphere and Earth's surface, creating echoes. But they don't delay 3 minutes. Echoes are usually within a few seconds at most." Colonel Hardwick leaned forward. "Did he record the transmission?" "He did. Standard procedure for ham radio operators. They keep logs of all contacts. I've already reached out to him. He's willing to share the recording." "Get it," Hardwick ordered, "and check if any other amateur operators were active in that region during the blackout. If one person experienced unusual echoes, others might have too." Kim spent the next 2 days tracking down every amateur radio operator who might have been transmitting near the Atlantic during the first blackout or the Pacific during the second. He found 8 in the Atlantic region, 6 in the Pacific. Every single one reported echo anomalies. The recordings were fascinating and deeply disturbing. Normal radio transmissions, voices of operators conducting routine contacts, exchanging call signs and signal reports. But in the background, barely audible, were echoes of their own voices, delayed, distorted slightly, and in some cases repeating words that hadn't been spoken yet. "That's impossible," I said, listening to one recording where an operator's echo clearly said a phrase 5 seconds before he actually spoke it. "Unless the signal is bouncing off something that's slightly out of temporal sync with us," Chen suggested. She joined us for the radio analysis, her expertise in space-time physics suddenly relevant to radio propagation. "Remember the time dilation we measured? If radio signals are propagating through a region where time flows at a different rate, they could arrive back at the source at unexpected times." Kim pulled up a technical diagram. Radio waves travel at the speed of light. In normal space, a signal travelling to an object 300 miles away and back would take about 3 milliseconds. But if that object exists in a slightly slower temporal reference frame, the signal experiences more time during its round trip than we measure, Chen finished. From our perspective, it's delayed. And if the temporal distortion is complex enough, maybe varying with distance from the object, you could get signals arriving both before and after they should. "Like echoes scattered across time," I said. "Exactly." Hardwick studied the data. "So we've got visual blackouts, gravitational anomalies, time dilation, and now temporal displacement of radio signals. All pointing to the same conclusion. This object exists partially outside our normal space-time. Or it's creating its own localized space-time," Chen suggested. "A bubble of reality with different physical laws existing within our universe, but not fully subject to our physics. One of the analysts, a young woman named Santos who specialized in signal intelligence, had been quietly reviewing the radio recordings. She spoke up hesitantly. "There's something else, something in the echoes." Everyone turned to her. "I've been running spectral analysis on the recordings. The echo isn't just delayed or temporally displaced, it's modulated. There's additional information encoded in the reflection." She played one of the recordings again, this time with visualization software showing the signal's frequency spectrum. Normal voice transmission appeared as expected patterns, but the echo showed additional structure, subtle variations in frequency and amplitude that weren't present in the original transmission. "It could be interference," Kim suggested, "the signal passing through ionized atmosphere or encountering electromagnetic fields." "That's what I thought at first," Santos agreed, "but the modulation is too regular. It repeats across multiple recordings from different operators, the same pattern embedded in every echo." "Show us," Hardwick ordered. Santos pulled up a comparison. 8 different recordings, 8 different voices, 8 different languages. But underneath the human speech, barely visible in the spectral analysis, was a consistent pattern. A regular pulse, varying in a complex sequence. "It's a signal," I said, recognizing the pattern from my aviation background. "That's not natural interference, that's artificial modulation." "Someone is transmitting through the echoes," Chen said slowly, "using the delayed radio signals as a carrier wave for their own message." "Or something is," Hardwick corrected. "We spent the next 6 hours trying to decode the pattern. It wasn't any terrestrial radio protocol we recognized. Not Morse code, not digital encoding standards, not military communication systems." Finally, Santos found a partial match. "It's mathematical," she announced. "The sequence encodes prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, continuing through the first 50 primes." "A universal greeting," Chen said quietly. "If you want to signal intelligence to another species, you use mathematics. Primes are the same everywhere in the universe. Any technological civilization would recognize them." "So something is saying hello," I said. "Or something is saying, 'I'm here, I know you're here, I can hear you,'" Hardwick suggested, her expression grim. We reported our findings to the Skywatch leadership. The response was immediate. Establish a network of radio monitoring stations for the predicted third event. If this object was using radio echoes to communicate or signal its presence, we needed to capture as much data as possible. 3 days before the predicted Indian Ocean event, we had 60 amateur radio operators standing by, positioned around the globe, ready to transmit and listen during the 47-minute window. Professional radio astronomy stations were briefed. Military communication satellites prepared to monitor. If something wanted to send us a message through radio echoes, we were ready to receive it. What we didn't anticipate was that the message might not be meant for us. The night before the third event, Gordon Matthews, the New Zealand operator who'd first reported the echo anomaly, sent an encrypted message to Thomas Kim. It contained a new recording, made just hours earlier during a routine transmission test. His voice on the recording was calm, professional, reporting signal strength and atmospheric conditions. But the echo that came back wasn't his voice. It was his voice speaking words he'd said during the March 14th event. A conversation from 19 days ago, echoing back through time, like a delayed recording. And underneath his past voice, barely audible but unmistakable to anyone listening carefully, was something else. A sound that wasn't quite voice, wasn't quite machine, but suggested both. repeating the prime number sequence, and then just before the recording ended, a single word in English, perfectly clear. Observed. Chapter 7. The classified briefing. The secure conference room was larger this time. 23 people attended, representing agencies and organisations I'd never heard of, with classification levels that apparently extended beyond the standard system. I recognised Hardwick and Chen, but most faces were unfamiliar. The man at the head of the table introduced himself simply as Carlson, no title given. His age was indeterminate, somewhere between 50 and 70, with the particular weathered quality of someone who'd spent decades dealing with information most people never knew existed. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone used to delivering briefings about impossible subjects. "What we discuss here does not leave this room. No notes, no recordings, no external communications. What you learn today is compartmentalized at the highest level for very specific reasons that will become clear." He gestured to a technician who activated the room's main display. A familiar image appeared, the circular void over the Atlantic Ocean. For those newly read into this project, we're dealing with what we're designating an extraterrestrial observational event, an object of unknown origin, approximately 300 miles in diameter, that periodically positions itself in various locations and appears to conduct observation of Earth. The object possesses technology capable of rendering itself invisible across the electromagnetic spectrum, creating localized space-time distortions and potentially manipulating temporal flow within its operational zone. He paused, letting that sink in for the newcomers. "We have documented 3 events over the past 4 weeks. Each lasted exactly 47 minutes. Each produced identical signatures: electromagnetic absence, gravitational anomalies, time dilation effects, and radio echo phenomena. The pattern suggests regular planned observations occurring on a predetermined schedule." Another image, the global map, showing all 3 event locations. What I'm about to tell you has been confirmed through multiple independent sources and cross-verified by every analytical method we possess. We are not the first to discover this phenomenon. We are simply the first to do so while possessing the technical capabilities to properly document it. He nodded to an older woman sitting near the end of the table. She stood, introducing herself as Winters, director of some historical analysis division I'd never heard of. "We've been conducting archival research," Winters said, pulling up historical documents on the screen, looking for any previous reports that might match the current event profile. "We found 17 instances spanning the past 73 years. The documents were fascinating. Military reports from the 1950s describing radar negative zones over the Pacific. Astronomical observation logs from the 1970s noting temporary starfield absences. Aviation incident reports from the 1990s describing atmospheric dead zones. Each instance was investigated at the time and ultimately classified as equipment malfunction, atmospheric anomaly, or human error," Winters explained. "But when analysed together, they form a clear pattern. Regular appearances of an undetected object, consistent duration, similar spatial dimensions." "How regular?" someone asked. "Events appear to cluster around intervals of approximately 18 months, Winters replied, "with some variation, but generally consistent. Going back to our earliest confirmed case in June 1952, we can identify at least 34 events, possibly more that were never documented or were attributed to other causes." 70 years, I said aloud, doing the math. This thing has been observing Earth for at least 70 years? Likely much longer, Winters said. Our documentation only goes back to the early Cold War, when systematic radar coverage and astronomical observation became sufficiently advanced to potentially detect such events. Before that, an invisible object in the sky would have gone completely unnoticed. Carlson resumed control of the briefing. The critical question is why. Why observe Earth repeatedly over decades? Why maintain such precise operational patterns? Why allow yourself to be detected at all, however briefly? He pulled up the radio echo data, including the recent recordings with their embedded prime number sequences, and the final word, observed. Some of you have seen this already. For others, this is new. We have evidence suggesting the object is aware of our presence and may be actively communicating that awareness. The question is whether this is first contact or simply acknowledgement that we've finally noticed something that's been here all along. A man in navy uniform spoke up. What about the time dilation effects? If the object is experiencing time differently, could it be conducting very long-term observation? From its perspective, maybe these 47-minute events span much longer. That's one theory, Chen said, standing to address the room. If the object exists in a reference frame where time flows more slowly than ours, what we perceive as decades of periodic visits might be continuous observation from its perspective. It could be watching human civilization develop in real time by its own measurement, even though we see gaps between observations. Like watching a time-lapse video, I added, but from the object's viewpoint, it's regular speed. Exactly, Chen confirmed. Carlson pulled up new data, projections and predictions. We believe the next event will occur in 36 hours, Indian Ocean, as previously calculated. This will be the first event we've been able to prepare for properly. We'll have comprehensive monitoring in place, satellites repositioned for optimal coverage, ground-based observation stations ready, radio monitoring networks established. This is our opportunity to gather definitive data. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person, but we're also establishing contact protocols. In the event that this object is attempting communication, we need to be ready to respond, not as separate agencies or nations, but as a unified species. What happens in 36 hours may define how humanity enters the broader cosmic community. The weight of that statement settled over the room like physical pressure. There's one more thing, Carlson said, his voice dropping slightly. Something we've been asked to keep quiet, but that you all need to know. He pulled up what appeared to be a diplomatic communication, heavily redacted. 3 days ago, we received an inquiry from the Russian Space Agency. They've detected the same events we have. Different systems, different analysis methods, but identical conclusions. They wanted to know if we'd observed the recurring orbital anomaly and if we had any data to share. What did we tell them? Hardwick asked. We confirmed our observations and shared sanitized data. Within hours, we received similar inquiries from the European Space Agency, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and the Indian Space Research Organization. Everyone with advanced satellite capabilities has noticed. Everyone is asking the same questions. Which means this isn't just an American discovery, someone said. It's a global event. Exactly. And that changes the calculus considerably. Whatever message we send, whatever response we make, we're doing it on behalf of all humanity, whether we intend to or not. Carlson deactivated the display and faced us directly. In 36 hours, we will observe the fourth documented event of this phenomenon. We will record, analyse, and attempt to understand what we're seeing, and we will prepare for the possibility that we're not just being observed. We may be being evaluated." He paused, then added quietly, "I hope we pass." Chapter 8. The Observation Hypothesis. The preparation for the Indian Ocean event was extraordinary. I'd never seen resources mobilized so quickly or so completely. Within 24 hours, we had 3 reconnaissance satellites repositioned for optimal coverage, 2 radio astronomy arrays dedicated exclusively to monitoring the predicted coordinates, 17 amateur radio operators positioned across the Indian Ocean region, ready to transmit and listen. 4 naval vessels quietly moved into the area on routine patrol, 6 aircraft prepared for potential reconnaissance flights through the zone, and a monitoring station established at Diego Garcia, the military facility in the middle of the Indian Ocean, equipped with every detection system we could transport there. I was assigned to the Diego Garcia station, along with Chen and a team of 15 specialists. We arrived 12 hours before the predicted event and immediately began systems checks. The facility was already impressive: hardened communications infrastructure, advanced radar systems, satellite uplink capabilities, but we'd added equipment that pushed it into science fiction territory. Gravitational wave detectors sensitive enough to measure space-time ripples from stellar events light years away, atomic clocks accurate to billionths of a second, spectrometers that could analyze individual photons, radio receivers spanning every possible frequency. "If this thing shows up," Chen said, surveying the equipment, "we'll see it better than anything has ever been seen before." "Assuming it shows up," I replied. "It'll show up," she said with certainty. "The pattern is too consistent. Whatever this is, it keeps to a schedule." As the predicted time approached, tension in the facility increased palpably. Multiple screens showed feeds from different monitoring systems, satellite views, radar displays, radio spectrum analysis, gravitational wave readouts, everyone watching, waiting. 1800 UTC came and went. Nothing. 1801, 1802, still nothing. "Could we have miscalculated?" someone asked. "The pattern was clear," Chen replied, but I heard doubt creeping into her voice. 1803, 1804. And then at 1805 UTC, every electromagnetic sensor simultaneously showed the same thing. Absence. A perfect sphere of nothingness appeared in the sky above us, 300 miles in diameter, centered at the coordinates we'd predicted. Not gradually, instantaneously. One moment, normal sky. The next moment, a void. "We have confirmation," someone announced unnecessarily. Every screen in the facility showed the same event from different perspectives. "Gravitational wave detectors are showing massive fluctuation," Chen reported, watching her instruments. "Consistent with our previous readings, 0.73 lunar masses, impossibly compressed." "Radio spectrum clear," Kim called out. "Complete electromagnetic silence in the target zone." "Time drift detection is active," another analyst reported. "We're already measuring temporal offset. Current delta is 0.03 seconds and increasing." I watched the satellite feed, showing that impossible circular void in the sky. Knowing that 7 aircraft had flown through that darkness without their pilots noticing anything wrong. Knowing that this thing, whatever it was, had been appearing and disappearing for decades without anyone realizing. "All stations, this is Diego Garcia," Hardwick's voice came through on the communication channel. "We are go for active observation. Commence all planned monitoring protocols." The radio operators began their transmissions, sending coordinated signals into the void, waiting for echoes. The aircraft we'd positioned began their flights toward and through the zone. Additional satellites adjusted their orbits for better viewing angles. For 47 minutes, we would watch something that didn't want to be watched. 15 minutes in, Santos reported the first anomaly. Radio echoes are more complex this time. The embedded signal is stronger, and it's changing. Changing how? Hardwick demanded. The prime number sequence is still there, but there's additional modulation. I'm trying to isolate it. 20 minutes in, Chen announced another discovery. The time dilation is increasing. We started at 0.03 seconds offset. We're now at 0.11 seconds and still climbing. That's not consistent with the previous events. Is it accelerating? I asked. No, it's responding. She looked up from her instruments, her expression troubled. The rate of increase correlates with our observation activity. Every time we activate a new sensor, the temporal offset increases slightly. It's reacting to being watched, I said. Possibly. Or it's adjusting its own temporal reference frame in response to our measurements. 30 minutes in, one of our aircraft entered the zone. The pilot's voice came through clearly on the radio. Diego Garcia, this is Echo 7. We've entered the target coordinates. Visibility is strange. Sky appears normal, but feels wrong. Requesting confirmation that our instruments are reading correctly. Echo 7, your instruments are within normal parameters, the flight controller responded. Continue your transit. Understood. But Diego Garcia, I need to report that the sky doesn't look right. Stars are visible, but the patterns are off. It's like someone rearranged the constellations but left them almost correct. That matched what Emily Rodriguez had reported from the first event. The sky looked almost right, but not quite. Like a simulation that got the details slightly wrong. Echo 7, can you specify which constellations appear incorrect? I asked, taking over the communication. Southern Cross is too low on the horizon. Orion's belt has the wrong angle. Scorpius is, I don't know, shifted maybe? It's subtle. If I wasn't a pilot who navigates by stars, I wouldn't notice. But it's wrong. Copy that, Echo 7. Continue observation and report any other anomalies. Chen was already pulling up star charts. If the pilot is right about the stellar positions, it means we're not seeing the real sky. We're seeing a projection or simulation of what the sky should look like. But whoever's running the simulation got the details slightly wrong. Or the simulation is accurate for a different time, I suggested. Maybe we're seeing what the sky looked like hours or days ago, before the object arrived. That would explain the pilot's observation, Chen agreed. If the object is replaying stored imagery of the sky before it arrived, any changes in stellar positions from Earth's rotation would create noticeable discrepancies. 40 minutes in, Santos reported a breakthrough. I've decoded the additional modulation in the radio echoes. It's not random, it's coordinates, latitude and longitude. What coordinates? Hardwick demanded. Santos pulled up a map. Multiple locations, all over Earth, and they're... Oh no. What is it? These are the locations of every major astronomical observatory. Arecibo, Mauna Kea, La Silla, Parkes, Green Bank, Jodrell Bank. Every major facility capable of observing space. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The object was transmitting the locations of humanity's observation infrastructure, showing us that it knew where we watched the sky from, that it had catalogued our capabilities. It's been studying us, I said quietly. Not just observing, studying, learning where we look, what we can see, how we see it. 45 minutes in, the gravitational wave detectors showed a new pattern. Gravitational field is fluctuating, Chen reported, oscillating in a regular cycle, period of approximately 2 seconds. It's like a pulse. A heartbeat, someone suggested. Or a clock, I countered. Marking time, maybe synchronizing something. 46 minutes in, every sensor began registering the high-energy pulse we'd detected in previous events, but this time we had better equipment to analyze it. Directed emission, Chen said, watching the data flow. Not omnidirectional. The pulse is aimed, sweeping across Earth's surface like a spotlight. What's it illuminating? Hardwick asked. Everything. The pulse is hitting every major population centre, every city, over 1 million people. It's scanning, taking a snapshot of human civilization. 47 minutes in, exactly as predicted, the void vanished, instantaneously. Every sensor simultaneously returned to showing normal sky. The silence in the monitoring station was absolute. Someone just took our picture, Kim said finally. That's what this was. An observational platform conducting a systematic scan of Earth, taking measurements, recording data, building a comprehensive picture of human civilization. The question is, Hardwick said slowly, what are they going to do with that picture? Chapter 9. The Return Pattern. The analysis of the third event took 72 hours of continuous work. Every piece of data was examined, cross-referenced, and verified. The conclusions were disturbing. We gathered in the Diego Garcia facility for the final briefing. Carlson had flown in personally, along with representatives from 6 other nations who'd been observing the event through their own systems. Chen presented the findings, her exhaustion evident, but her analysis impeccable. The object is conducting systematic observation of Earth according to a predetermined schedule. We've now documented 4 events and identified 34 historical instances. When we plot these on a timeline, a pattern emerges. She displayed a graph showing event frequency over time. In the 1950s, events occurred approximately every 24 months. In the 1960s and 70s, roughly every 21 months. In the 1980s, 19 months. 1990s, 17 months. 2000s, 15 months. The interval is decreasing. It's accelerating, I said. Correct. And if we extrapolate forward, the next event after the Indian Ocean occurrence should happen in approximately 13 months. The event after that, 11 months. The intervals are shortening. Why? Someone asked. 2 possibilities, Chen replied. Either the object is increasing observation frequency in response to human technological development, or it's approaching some kind of conclusion, a deadline. A Russian representative spoke up, her English accented but clear. We have analysed same data. We agree with conclusion, but we have additional finding. The locations are not random. She pulled up a global map showing all documented event locations. At first, they appeared scattered randomly across the oceans, but then she overlaid population density data. Every event location had been positioned to provide optimal observation of major population centres. The Atlantic event covered observation of North America and Europe. The Pacific event covered observation of Asia and Australia. The Indian Ocean event covered observation of South Asia, the Middle East, and East Africa. It is comprehensive survey, she continued, each location chosen to maximise coverage of human civilization. No major population centre is out of range. So it's not just observing Earth, I said. It's specifically observing us, humanity. That's our assessment, Carlson confirmed, and the increasing frequency suggests either intensifying interest or approaching decision point. A Chinese analyst stood up. We have also identified pattern in event duration, always 47 minutes, never longer, never shorter. This is significant. Why? Hardwick asked. Because 47 minutes is meaningful time unit in cosmic terms. It is approximately the orbital period of object at altitude necessary to maintain geosynchronous observation relative to Earth's rotation. The object positions itself, observes for exactly one orbital period, then disappears. Like it's matching its observation window to its natural orbit, I said, understanding. It's not just appearing at random, it's synchronizing with Earth's rotation. Precisely. Which means the object is not just observing, it is remaining in perfect orbital synchronization with Earth, suggesting permanent presence, with visibility occurring only when it chooses to reveal itself. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed that implication. "You're saying it's always there," Hardwick said slowly, "that it doesn't arrive and depart. It's constantly in orbit, constantly observing, and occasionally becomes briefly visible." "That is our theory," the Chinese analyst confirmed. Winters, the historical researcher, spoke up. "If that's true, we need to reconsider everything we know about our astronomical observation history. Every unexplained anomaly, every strange sighting, every instance of satellites behaving oddly. We may have been sharing our orbital space with this object for decades or longer without knowing it." "Centuries," Chen corrected quietly. "If this technology can render itself invisible and maintain perfect orbital synchronization, there's no reason to believe it hasn't been here much longer than 70 years. We only started detecting it when our technology became sensitive enough to notice the side effects, the electromagnetic absence, the time dilation, the gravitational waves. So we've been observed for potentially hundreds of years," I said, "while believing we were alone, while developing our civilization, our technology, our space program, all under observation." "Under study," Chen emphasized. "This isn't casual observation. The systematic coverage, the increasing frequency, the detailed scanning, this is deliberate scientific study. We're being examined like specimens." Carlson stood, taking control of the briefing. "Based on this analysis, we need to consider several possibilities. 1. This is first contact. An extraterrestrial civilization has been studying us and is now increasing observation frequency as we approach technological parity, preparing for eventual open contact. 2. This is threat assessment. We're being evaluated to determine whether human civilization represents a danger or competitor. 3. This is preparation. Something is coming, and we're being surveyed in advance of that arrival. 4. This is cataloguing. We're being documented systematically, possibly as part of some larger project or database covering multiple civilizations or worlds." He paused, letting each possibility sink in. "The event pattern suggests we're approaching some kind of critical point. The decreasing intervals between observations, the increasing intensity of scanning, the more overt signals in the radio echoes, all point to a timeline. Something will happen when that timeline concludes." "How long?" the Russian representative asked. "If the acceleration continues at current rate," Chen said, pulling up projections, "we estimate approximately 36 months until events are occurring monthly. 72 months until weekly. At that point, the pattern breaks down. Either the observation becomes continuous or something else happens." 6 years, I said. "We have 6 years before whatever this is reaches its conclusion." "That's our best estimate," Carlson confirmed, "which means we have 6 years to prepare, to understand what we're dealing with, to decide how humanity responds to the reality that we're not alone, and that we've been under observation for generations without knowing it." He looked around the room at the assembled representatives of various nations and agencies. The next event will occur in approximately 13 months, based on our projections. We'll have better preparation, better monitoring, better analysis capabilities. But more importantly, we'll have time to think about what message we want to send. Because I guarantee you, whatever is conducting these observations is paying attention to how we respond. Then we need to coordinate, the Russian representative said. This is not an American event, or Chinese event, or any single nation event. This concerns all humanity. Response must be unified. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. I propose joint monitoring station, she continued. International facility, shared resources, full data transparency. We observe together, we analyse together, we respond together. Agreed, Carlson said without hesitation. We'll work through diplomatic channels to establish formal protocols, but effectively immediately, all data regarding these events will be shared among participating nations. It was, in its own way, historic. The first truly global response to a truly global phenomenon. Different nations, different agencies, different priorities, all recognizing that some things transcended politics. Because something was watching us. Something had been watching us for a very long time. And soon that observation period might be coming to an end. Chapter 10. The final realization. 3 weeks after the Indian Ocean event, I was still at Diego Garcia, reviewing data and preparing reports. Most of the team had rotated out, but Chen and I had remained, following threads of analysis that refused to resolve into clear answers. It was 2 a.m. local time when Chen burst into the analysis room, looking more awake than anyone should be at that hour. I know what it is, she said without preamble. I know what we've been missing. I looked up from my workstation, where I'd been reviewing radio echo recordings for the 100th time. What we've been missing? The timing, the duration, the orbital synchronization. We've been thinking about it wrong. She pulled up the data on the main display, showing the timeline of all documented events. We assumed the 47-minute windows were when the object became visible. But what if it's the opposite? What do you mean? What if the object is always visible and the 47-minute windows are when it looks at us? I stared at her, my tired brain struggling to process the implication. You're saying we've been assuming the electromagnetic absence, the void in our recordings, was the object hiding itself. But what if that's when it's actively observing? What if the field that makes our instruments show nothing is actually the observation mechanism itself? She pulled up the technical data on time dilation and gravitational effects. Look at the pattern. The strongest gravitational readings occur during the blackout. The most pronounced time dilation occurs during the blackout. The radio echo anomalies are most intense during the blackout. All our evidence points to the blackout windows being periods of maximum activity, not minimum. But the pilots saw the sky, I objected. During the blackouts, they reported normal visibility. Exactly. They saw a simulation of the sky. The object was projecting an artificial visual environment while simultaneously conducting intensive observation. Our instruments detected the truth, that we were in a zone of altered physics. But to the human eye, everything looked normal because something was actively maintaining that illusion. She brought up the stellar position data from the aircraft reports. Remember how the constellations were slightly wrong? We thought that was because the simulation was inaccurate. But what if it's because the simulation was showing us the sky from the object's perspective, from slightly outside our normal space-time? I stood up pacing as the implications cascaded through my mind. So during the 47-minute windows, the object isn't hiding, it's turned toward us. It's looking directly at Earth with such intensity that it temporarily disrupts the physics around it, and it projects an artificial visual environment to hide the fact that it's observing. Right, and here's the critical part. She pulled up the acceleration data, showing the decreasing intervals between events. The observation windows are getting more frequent, not because the object is checking in more often, but because it's spending more time looking at us. The intervals represent how long it looks away. And those intervals are shrinking, I said, understanding dawning, which means it's turning toward us permanently. By our projections, in 6 years, the intervals between observation windows will reach 0. There won't be any time when it's not looking at us. The weight of that realization settled over us both. We've had it backwards, I said slowly. We thought we were detecting an object that occasionally appeared, but we've been living under continuous observation, with brief respites when it looked away, and those respites are ending. There's more, Chen said, pulling up the gravitational wave data. I've been analysing the oscillating pattern we detected during the last event. The 2-second pulse. I thought it was random, but it's not. She showed me the pattern, magnified and enhanced. It's repeating, cycling through the same sequence, and when I compared it to our radio signals, she overlaid the two datasets. My breath caught. The gravitational pulse pattern matched the radio signals exactly. Every peak and trough, every oscillation corresponded perfectly to the audio waveforms of the radio transmissions our operators had sent. It's not transmitting, I said. It's echoing. It's listening to our radio signals and repeating them back to us through gravitational waves. Which means it's not just observing passively, it's actively analysing our communications, learning our language, our information patterns, our civilization. She pulled up one final piece of data. The high-energy pulse from the end of the event, enhanced and analysed. And this isn't a scan, it's a ping. Like sonar, it sends out a pulse and measures how long it takes to reflect back from various points on Earth's surface. It's mapping us in 3 dimensions with extraordinary precision. Building a model, I said, a complete physical map of human civilization. Infrastructure, populations, resources. Every event adds more detail to that map, and with the observation windows becoming more frequent, the model is approaching real-time accuracy. Soon, it won't need to scan. It'll have continuous surveillance. I sat down heavily, the full scope of what we'd discovered finally becoming clear. We've been documented, I said, systematically, comprehensively, for decades or longer, every aspect of human civilization, recorded and analysed. And now we're reaching the final phase, where observation becomes continuous. The question is why, Chen said. Why observe us so thoroughly? Why build such a detailed model of our civilization? Because something needs to know everything about us before it makes contact, I suggested. Or before it does something else. Chen nodded slowly. Or because we're part of something larger. Think about it. If this object has been here for decades, observing with increasing frequency, there must be others elsewhere. Observing other worlds, other civilizations, all reporting back to something. A network, I said. A monitoring network covering multiple worlds, all feeding data to some central location. Which means we're not special. We're just one of many worlds under observation. And whatever's watching us is watching others too. We sat in silence for a long moment, surrounded by data that proved humanity's place in the universe was far stranger and more concerning than anyone had imagined. What do we do with this? I finally asked. We report it, Chen said. We present our analysis. We let the decision makers decide how to respond. But Marcus, what? In 6 years, when the observation becomes continuous, when that object is permanently watching us without looking away, that's probably when the next phase begins. Whatever's been documented needs to be complete before whatever happens next. So we're on a clock, I said. We've always been on a clock. We just didn't know it until now. Epilogue. The next window. The report Chen and I submitted caused what can only be described as controlled panic at the highest levels of multiple governments. The realization that we'd been living under continuous observation, with only brief windows when that observation paused, fundamentally changed how leadership thought about the phenomenon. Within 6 months, the International Observational Event Monitoring Network was established, headquartered at Diego Garcia, but with stations across the globe. Dozens of nations participated, sharing data and resources in an unprecedented level of cooperation. The next event, predicted for 13 months after the Indian Ocean occurrence, happened exactly on schedule. We were ready with the most comprehensive monitoring network ever assembled. Satellites, ground stations, aircraft, ships, all watching, all recording. The object appeared precisely where our calculations predicted. 47 minutes of observation, identical in signature to the previous events. But this time, we knew what we were seeing. It wasn't hiding. It was looking at us. The pilots who flew through the zone reported the same artificial sky, the same feeling of wrongness, the same sense of something vast watching them pass through its field of view. Our instruments detected the same electromagnetic absence, the same gravitational pulses, the same time dilation. But we also detected something new. At the end of the 47 minutes, just before the object turned away, there was a brief moment, less than 3 seconds, where our instruments picked up an actual image. Not the electromagnetic void, not absence, but presence. Something actually visible for an instant before it vanished back into invisibility. The image was analysed by hundreds of specialists, enhanced, filtered, reconstructed. What emerged was impossible to fully comprehend, but certain features were clear. A structure, vast beyond anything humanity had built. Not a ship in the traditional sense, but something between architecture, an organism. Surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Edges that curved through spaces our geometry couldn't describe. And in the centre, barely visible in the image, something that might have been an opening. Or an eye, looking at Earth. Since that event, we've documented 3 more occurrences, each predicted accurately, each observed comprehensively, each lasting exactly 47 minutes. The intervals continue to decrease on schedule. We're currently projecting the next event to occur in 7 months. After that, 6 months, then 5. The timeline marches forward, inexorably, toward the point where observation becomes continuous. The global response has been extraordinary. Disclosure to the public is being carefully managed, with information released gradually to avoid panic. But increasingly people know. They know something is watching. They know we're not alone. They know that whatever's out there has been studying us for a very long time. Proposals range from attempting communication to building defensive systems. Religious leaders debate whether this represents divine observation or alien threat. Scientists scramble to understand the physics that could enable such capabilities. Philosophers grapple with what it means to be the observed rather than the observers. But in the monitoring stations, watching the data accumulate event after event, we understand something the public discourse hasn't fully grasped yet. This isn't first contact. This is final observation. Whatever has been watching us for decades is nearly finished with its study. The increasing frequency, the detailed scanning, the systematic documentation, it's all building towards something. Some conclusion, some decision, some next phase. In approximately 6 years, if our projections hold, the observation will become continuous. The object will turn toward Earth permanently, its gaze never wavering, its attention never shifting away. And then, something will happen. What that something is, we don't know. Contact, invasion, evaluation, inclusion in some larger cosmic community. Or perhaps something we can't even imagine, conducted by intelligences so far beyond our understanding that their motivations remain forever incomprehensible. But we know it's coming. We can see it in the data, in the shrinking intervals between observations, in the increasing intensity of the scanning pulses. Something is watching us, has been watching us, will continue watching us with escalating attention until whatever it's waiting for finally arrives. The sky isn't empty. It never was. We just couldn't see what was looking back at us. Until now. And in 6 years, when observation becomes permanent, when that vast eye turns toward us and never looks away, we'll finally learn what all that watching was for. I think about that often as I continue my work at the monitoring station. Every new event brings more data, more understanding, more questions. But underneath all the analysis and speculation, one truth remains constant. The silence of the sky was never empty space. It was attention, patient, methodical, comprehensive attention from something with capabilities beyond our understanding and purposes beyond our imagination. And soon, very soon, that attention will become permanent, whether we're ready for it or not. The next window is predicted to open in 197 days. We'll be watching when it does, recording, analysing, trying to understand. But somewhere up there, in a region of sky that looks empty to every instrument we possess, something is already watching us, has been watching us all along, will continue watching us until whatever purpose drives it finally reaches completion. The 47-minute windows aren't when something appears. They're when something stops pretending to be absent. When the mask slips briefly and we glimpse the truth, we've never been alone. We've been observed, documented, studied, and catalogued for far longer than we've known. And the observation period is almost complete. What comes after observation, that's what keeps me awake at night. That's what we have 6 years to prepare for. That's what the next window will bring us one step closer to understanding. The sky isn't silent, it's listening, watching, waiting, and in 6 years it will finally speak. There are jobs in this world that exist in the margins of infrastructure, positions that sound vaguely important when you explain them at family dinners, but that make people's eyes glaze over within 30 seconds. I held one of these jobs for 6 years. My official title was Maritime Systems Technician, which sounds far more impressive than the reality. What I actually did was maintain automated monitoring stations in offshore locations, buoys, weather instruments, data collection arrays positioned miles from any coastline. The work was exactly as boring as it sounds. Every assignment followed an identical pattern: boat transport to the site, visual inspection of the exterior housing, diagnostic check of all sensors and transmission equipment, replace battery cells if needed, download stored data, update firmware if scheduled, return to shore, file report, repeat in 2 months. The company I worked for, Coastal Environmental Monitoring Systems, held contracts with 3 different federal agencies. The stations we maintained collected ocean temperature data, monitored weather patterns, tracked shipping lane traffic, and performed a dozen other functions that fed into databases I never saw. My job was not to interpret the data. My job was to keep the equipment functioning so the data could be collected at all. Most people lasted 18 months in this position before transferring to something less isolating. The turnover rate was remarkable. You spent entire days alone on a small boat, sometimes in challenging weather, performing repetitive technical work that required just enough concentration to prevent boredom from being relaxing. It was meditation for people who hated meditation. It was solitude for people who had not necessarily chosen solitude. I stayed because the isolation suited me. I had worked in open-plan offices, in warehouses with constant radio chatter, in environments where being perceived as unfriendly was a workplace liability. Offshore, maintenance eliminated all of that. No meetings, no small talk, no performance reviews that hinged on whether you smiled enough during shift changes. Just me, the ocean, and equipment that either worked or did not work. The assignment that changed everything came through in late October. Station Delta 7 required a routine maintenance check. The station was positioned 43 miles northeast of the coast, in water deep enough that the buoy structure extended down nearly 200 feet. Delta 7 was one of the older installations, commissioned in the early 2000s, built to last with minimal intervention. It had been functioning without issue for years. The work order was standard: diagnostic check, battery replacement, firmware update to version 3.4.1, estimated time on site 4 hours, weather window favourable, no complications anticipated. I loaded my gear at dawn. The maintenance vessel we used was a 32-foot workboat with a reinforced stern platform for equipment access, not comfortable, but reliable. I performed the pre-departure checklist: fuel, emergency beacon, radio check, tool inventory, spare parts manifest. Everything was accounted for. Everything was routine. The trip out took 2 hours. The ocean was calm, the sky overcast but stable. I reviewed the station specs on my tablet during the transit. Delta 7 collected standard oceanographic data, salinity, temperature at multiple depths, current speed and direction. It also housed a secondary array that monitored underwater acoustic signatures, part of a marine mammal tracking program I had only vague awareness of. The acoustic equipment was maintained by a different contractor. I was only responsible for the primary systems. When Delta 7 came into view, it looked exactly as expected. The buoy itself was a yellow cylindrical structure, about 15 feet in diameter, topped with a sensor mast and solar panel array. The structure bobbed gently in the low swells, its position light blinking at regular intervals. Entirely normal, entirely unremarkable. I manoeuvred the workboat alongside the buoy's service platform and secured the mooring lines. The platform was a metal grating that extended from the buoy at water level, designed to give technicians stable access without boarding the buoy itself. I shut down the boat engine and began unloading my equipment: diagnostic kit, battery modules, laptop, waterproof case containing printed maintenance protocols, because relying entirely on digital devices in a marine environment is how you end up stranded with a dead tablet and no backup. The first hour proceeded exactly as planned. I opened the primary access panel and connected my diagnostic interface. The system booted up normally, displaying all expected parameters. I worked through the checklist item by item. Sensor calibration, nominal. Power distribution, nominal. Data storage, 82% capacity, well within acceptable. Range, transmission logs showed successful uploads every 6 hours, exactly as programmed. Everything was functioning perfectly. Too perfectly in hindsight, though I did not recognize this at the time. Chapter 1. The signal that didn't belong. I was 40 minutes into the battery replacement procedure when I noticed it. The diagnostic interface displayed a frequency spectrum analysis as part of the standard acoustic array check. This was not equipment I normally interacted with. I just needed to verify the array was drawing power correctly and not throwing errors. But the spectrum display showed something I had never seen before. There was a signal present that did not match any documented frequency in the station's operating parameters. It was narrowband, precise, and repeating at irregular intervals. The frequency was 927 MHz, which placed it well outside the range of the acoustic monitoring equipment. The signal was weak, barely registering, above background noise, but it was absolutely, unmistakably there. I checked the documentation 3 times. 927 MHz was not allocated for any sensor on Delta 7. It was not an emergency frequency. It was not coastal guard transmission. It was not satellite relay. According to every specification I had access to, nothing on this station should have been generating or receiving at that frequency. I made a note in my maintenance log and continued working. Equipment picks up stray signals constantly. Maritime radio traffic, passing vessels, atmospheric interference. The ocean is not a quiet place, electromagnetically speaking. The signal was unusual, but not alarming. I noted it for the report and moved on. Except the signal did not behave like interference. Interference is chaotic. It fluctuates. It appears and disappears based on conditions, weather, distance from source, ionospheric activity. This signal did none of those things. It maintained absolutely consistent strength. The repetition pattern was irregular, but not random. There was structure to it, even if I could not identify what that structure was. I spent 15 minutes trying to isolate the source. I disconnected the acoustic array entirely. The signal persisted. I powered down the secondary monitoring systems. The signal persisted. I shut down everything except core buoy functions, position beacon, basic telemetry. The signal was still there. Whatever was generating this signal, it was not part of Delta 7's equipment. I checked my own gear. Sometimes diagnostic tools generate harmonics or produce artifacts that appear as false signals. But my equipment was shielded and certified for maritime use. I powered everything down and used a handheld spectrum analyzer, a completely independent device with its own antenna. The signal showed up identically. It was real, it was external, and it was close. I documented everything with photographs and written notes. Frequency, signal strength, time of detection, equipment configuration. This was no longer routine maintenance. This was an anomaly, and anomalies required documentation. The protocol for unexpected findings was clear. Note the observation. Complete remaining maintenance tasks. Report upon return. Do not deviate from schedule unless immediate safety concern exists. The signal did not constitute a safety concern. It was not interfering with station operations. It was simply there, like background radiation or distant thunder. I made the decision to continue working, but I could not stop thinking about it. 927 megahertz, narrowband, repeating. Close enough to detect, but not strong enough to identify range or direction. What was transmitting? And more importantly, why here? Chapter 2. Equipment acting too helpful. I resumed the battery replacement procedure, but my attention was divided now. I kept the spectrum analyzer running on the platform beside me, watching the signal trace appear and disappear in its irregular pattern. The repetition intervals ranged from 20 seconds to just over 2 minutes. I could not identify any mathematical relationship between intervals. It was not random, but it was not predictable either. That was when I noticed the second anomaly. The navigation system on my workboat had turned itself on. I had shut down all non-essential systems after securing the mooring. Standard procedure: conserve battery, reduce electromagnetic interference with diagnostic equipment. But now, the chart plotter screen was illuminated, showing my current position with unusual precision. Latitude and longitude displayed to 6 decimal places instead of the usual 4. The position accuracy indicator showed less than 1 meter of error, which was remarkable for a civilian GPS receiver in open ocean conditions. I stared at the screen for a long moment before turning it off manually. 2 minutes later it was on again. This time I checked the power connection. Secure. I checked the breaker panel. The navigation system circuit was in the off position. I physically disconnected the power cable from the back of the unit. The screen stayed on. That should have been impossible. The unit had no internal battery. It was hardwired to the boat's electrical system. Without power, the screen should have gone dark immediately. Instead, it continued displaying my position with that same unsettling precision. I disconnected my tablet from the buoy's diagnostic port and checked its battery percentage. 89%. I had been running intensive diagnostics for over 90 minutes. The battery should have been down to 70% at most. Instead, it had somehow gained charge. I looked at the solar panel array on top of the buoy. The day was overcast. Solar charging should have been minimal. But when I checked the buoy's power management logs, they showed optimal charging conditions, as if the panels were receiving full sunlight despite the cloud cover above me. Equipment was behaving in ways that benefited my work. Navigation more precise than it should be. Batteries maintaining charge longer than expected. Systems optimizing themselves without input. It felt less like malfunction and more like assistance. I ran a diagnostic on the buoy's primary computer. Error logs that should have required acknowledgement and clearing had resolved themselves. Timestamps showed they had been addressed 3 minutes before I even connected my interface. Temperature warnings that had appeared earlier in the diagnostic cycle now showed as false positives, retroactively corrected. The systems were not failing. They were anticipating, compensating, smoothing over irregularities before those irregularities could become problems. I thought about the signal. Narrow band, precise repeating. What if it was not a transmission in the traditional sense? What if it was something else, a monitoring frequency, a targeting beam, a way of observing without announcing presence? I finished the battery replacement in silence, double-checking each connection, verifying each seal. The work required focus, and I forced myself to maintain protocol. But my hands were less steady than usual. Something about the situation felt fundamentally wrong in a way I could not articulate. When I powered the station back up after the battery swap, every system initialized perfectly. No errors, no warnings, no diagnostic flags whatsoever. For a station this old, operating in marine conditions for over 2 decades, that level of perfection was statistically improbable. Equipment degrades, sensors drift, connections corrode. Finding zero issues was more suspicious than finding minor problems. I saved the diagnostic report and disconnected my laptop. The firmware update was next on the checklist, but something made me hesitate. Updating firmware meant rewriting core system instructions. What if whatever was causing these anomalies was embedded in the current firmware version? What if updating it interrupted something that should not be interrupted? I had no rational justification for this concern. The firmware update was scheduled maintenance, tested and certified by the manufacturer, but the thought persisted anyway. I decided to postpone the update. I told myself it was because I wanted to investigate the signal anomaly first, but the truth was simpler. I was uncomfortable. The situation felt wrong, and I did not want to change anything until I understood what I was dealing with. Chapter 3. The shape beneath the water. The visual inspection was the final item on my checklist. I needed to examine the underwater portion of the buoy structure for biofouling, corrosion, and structural integrity. This required leaning over the service platform and looking down into the water. Simple in theory, dangerous in practice if you lost your balance. The water around Delta 7 was remarkably clear. That day, visibility extended down perhaps 60 or 70 feet before the depths became too dark to penetrate. The buoy's anchor cable descended straight down from the center of the structure, disappearing into shadow. I performed the inspection methodically. The waterline showed minimal growth, some barnacles, a thin film of algae, nothing requiring immediate remediation. The cable housing appeared intact. The sacrificial anode system showed appropriate corrosion, indicating it was functioning as designed. And then I saw the shape. It was deep, at the very edge of visibility, where the blue-green water transitioned to black. A form that did not belong to the ocean floor or the buoy's anchor system. At first, I thought it was a whale. The size was certainly consistent, at least 40 feet long, possibly larger, but the shape was wrong. Too geometric, too regular, and it was not moving the way marine life moves. No undulation, no drift with the current. It was perfectly still in a way that seemed to ignore the motion of the water around it. I adjusted my position on the platform, trying to get a better angle. The shape remained at the edge of visibility, neither approaching nor receding. It simply existed there, as if it had always been there, as if I had only just now noticed what had been present all along. The water immediately around it appeared different, calmer. The current that moved through this area, a gentle but persistent flow that affected everything below the surface, seemed to part around the shape. The water was not disturbed or agitated. It simply did not interact with the object in the way water should interact with a submerged form. I retrieved waterproof binoculars from my gear bag. They were designed for surface use, not underwater viewing, but they provided some magnification. When I looked through them, the shape became slightly more defined but no more comprehensible. It had surfaces, angles, sections that caught light differently, despite being at depth where light should have been largely absorbed. The form suggested deliberate construction rather than natural formation or biological growth, and it was aligned with the buoy, not positioned randomly beneath the station, but precisely aligned, as if Delta 7 had been placed above it intentionally, as if the buoy's location had been chosen because of what was already here, not despite it. I thought about the signal. 927 megahertz, narrow band repeating. I thought about the equipment anomalies, systems optimizing themselves, error logs resolving without input. I thought about the maintenance schedule, routine inspections every 2 months, keeping human presence in the area regular but not continuous. What if Delta 7 was not primarily an environmental monitoring station. What if its real function was something else entirely? I took photographs, though I knew they would show nothing. Underwater photography requires specialized equipment and lighting. My standard maintenance camera would capture only murky blue-green nothing. But I photographed anyway, documenting what I was seeing, even if the documentation would be inadequate. The shape remained motionless. I watched it for nearly 15 minutes, waiting for movement, for any indication of what it was or what it was doing. Nothing changed. It existed. It persisted. It did not acknowledge my observation in any detectable way. Finally, I stood up from the platform edge and returned to my equipment. My maintenance checklist was complete except for the firmware update, which I had already decided to postpone. By all official measures, my work at Delta 7 was finished, but leaving felt wrong. Not dangerous, I felt no threat, no sense of immediate harm. Just the persistent wrongness of walking away from something I did not understand. I checked the time. I had been on site for 3 hours and 40 minutes. The weather window would hold for another 6 hours at minimum. I had fuel and supplies for an extended stay if needed. I made a decision that violated protocol. I would remain at the station for another hour. Not to perform additional maintenance, but to observe, to see if anything changed, to determine if what I was experiencing was genuine anomaly or simply my imagination transforming routine equipment, quirks into something more significant. I sat on the equipment cases on the service platform, laptop open, spectrum analyzer running, watching both the signal trace and the water below, and I waited. Chapter 4: Communication without language. The signal changed at the 47-minute mark of my observation period. It did not increase in strength or shift frequency. Instead, the pattern of repetition altered. The intervals between pulses, which had been irregular but seemingly random, suddenly became structured. 3 short pulses followed by a longer gap, then 2 pulses with a medium gap, then 4 pulses in rapid succession. It was not Morse code. It was not any communication protocol I recognized, but it was unmistakably intentional. I moved closer to the edge of the platform. The signal pattern shifted again. 5 rapid pulses, long gap, single pulse, medium gap. I stepped back toward my equipment. The pattern returned to something closer to its original, irregular structure. It was responding to my position. I tested this systematically. When I moved toward the buoy's northern access panel, the signal increased its pulse frequency. When I moved south, the frequency decreased. When I remained stationary, the pattern stabilized into something almost rhythmic. The signal was not being broadcast outward to be received by distant equipment. It was reacting to proximity, to my proximity specifically, or perhaps to any human presence in the area. I spoke aloud. "I can detect your signal." The pattern did not change. I tried different phrasings, different tones, no response. Whatever was generating the signal either could not hear me or had no interest in auditory communication. But when I moved my hand near the diagnostic port on the buoy, the signal pattern became sharp and rapid. When I pulled my hand away, it returned to baseline. It was tracking my interaction with the station's systems. A thought occurred to me that I immediately tried to dismiss but could not. The signal was not communication in the sense of transmitting information from sender to receiver. It was more fundamental than that. It was awareness, acknowledgement, the electromagnetic equivalent of making eye contact. Something was aware I was here. I looked down at the water again. The shape remained at the edge of visibility, unchanged. But now I noticed something I had missed before. The anchor cable that descended from Delta 7 did not terminate at the ocean floor. It extended downward into the darkness, yes, but its angle was wrong. Anchor cables hang vertically under tension. This cable curved slightly, as if drawn towards something offset from the buoy's position, as if the cable was not anchored to the seabed at all, but to something else entirely. I retrieved my maintenance documentation and found the technical drawings for Delta 7. The anchor system specifications indicated a depth of 160 feet to the ocean floor in this location. The cable length was listed as 180 feet, providing appropriate scope for a secure mooring. I took a depth reading using the boat's sonar. The ocean floor was 340 feet below me. The specifications were wrong, or they had been changed, or Delta 7 was not anchored to the bottom at all. I felt a sensation that I can only describe as certainty without source. Not intuition, not deduction, but simple knowledge that appeared fully formed in my mind. The shape beneath the water was not a separate object that happened to be near the buoy. The buoy was tethered to it. Delta 7 was not monitoring the ocean. It was monitoring whatever was down there, or perhaps it was being monitored by it. The maintenance schedule suddenly made terrible sense. Regular inspections every 2 months, human presence in the area at predictable intervals, giving something opportunities to observe us while we believed we were observing it. I thought about the equipment anomalies again, systems optimizing themselves, navigation improving beyond normal specifications, batteries maintaining charge impossibly well. What if those were not malfunctions? What if they were interactions? A submerged intelligence making itself helpful, smoothing over complications, making the human technician's job easier. Why? To encourage us to keep coming back? To maintain the relationship? To study us more effectively? The signal pattern changed again. This time it held steady, a consistent rhythm, neither increasing nor decreasing, regardless of my position. As if whatever was generating it had finished observing and was now simply maintaining presence. I should have left then. I should have collected my equipment, untied the mooring lines, and returned to shore immediately. But I needed one more confirmation, one more piece of evidence that what I was experiencing was real and not the product of isolation and overactive imagination. I pulled up the buoy's acoustic monitoring logs. The system recorded underwater sound at multiple frequencies, storing everything for later analysis. If the shape below was producing any noise, mechanical sounds, biological signatures, anything, it would be captured in these logs. I filtered the data to show only the previous 6 hours. The timeline showed exactly what I expected to see. Ocean ambient noise, biological activity, whales at distance, smaller marine life nearby, boat engine sounds during my arrival and mooring. And underneath all of that, a consistent low-frequency tone that should not have been there. It was below the range of human hearing, subsonic, but it was present in every recording, stretching back through the stored data. I scrolled backward through weeks of logs. The tone was always there, constant, unchanging, as if something below the station was maintaining a continuous acoustic presence, marking its territory, announcing itself to anything with sensors capable of detection. We had been recording it for years. Every 2 months, when technicians like me came out to service the equipment, we downloaded these logs and sent them back to shore. Someone had been reviewing this data. Someone had seen this tone, and no one had ever mentioned it in any maintenance report or technical advisory I had received. Either they had not noticed, which seemed unlikely given how prominent the signature was, or they had noticed and chosen not to say anything. Both possibilities were equally disturbing. Chapter 5. The log that rewrites itself. I documented everything in my maintenance log. The signal at 927 megahertz. The equipment optimizations. The shape beneath the water. The subsonic tone in the acoustic recordings. The anchor depth discrepancy. Every observation, every measurement, every timestamp. The log entry was thorough and professional. I included no speculation, no interpretation, just factual description of what I had observed and measured. This was protocol. Anomalies must be reported exactly as encountered. I saved the document and backed it up to 3 separate storage locations: my laptop, a USB drive, and the cloud storage system maintained by the company. Then I began preparing for departure. The sun was lower now. I needed to return before dark. As I was disconnecting the diagnostic equipment, my laptop chimed with a sync notification. The cloud backup had updated. I glanced at the screen and saw that my maintenance log file showed as modified 2 minutes ago. I had not touched it in 20 minutes. I opened the document. The entry was still there, but the wording had changed. Not dramatically. The facts were mostly intact, but the tone was different, softened. My description of unknown signal at 927 megahertz now read, possible interference pattern detected at 927 megahertz. My note about anchor depth discrepancy had become sonar reading inconsistent with specifications, suggest equipment calibration. The shape beneath the water was no longer mentioned at all. I checked the document properties, last modified by my user account from my laptop 2 minutes ago, but I had not modified anything. The file had rewritten itself. I immediately pulled up my USB backup. Identical changes. I checked my laptop's local copy. Same modifications. Only one possibility remained. I had not saved the original version before these changes occurred. What I remembered writing was not what the file now contained. Either I was misremembering my own documentation, or something had altered the files faster than I could create backups. I sat very still, trying to recall the exact wording I had used. Had I written unknown signal or possible interference? Had I noted the shape as definite or speculative? The memories were already becoming uncertain, as if the act of seeing the changed document was retroactively modifying my recollection of what I had originally written. I took out my handwritten notes, the paper log I maintained as backup. The entries there matched what I remembered. Unknown signal, repeating pattern, equipment anomalies confirmed, large object at depth, anchor discrepancy. The handwritten version was clear. The digital version had been sanitized. I typed a new entry. Maintenance log was modified without technician input. Changes softened language and removed specific observations. This entry serves as confirmation of original findings. I saved it. I watched the file properties. The timestamp updated normally. I waited 5 minutes. No changes appeared. Then I disconnected from the internet and disabled all wireless connections on my laptop. Whatever was modifying the files, it needed network access to do so. As long as I remained offline, my documentation should be safe. I packed my equipment carefully, securing everything for the return trip. The signal was still present on the spectrum analyzer, maintaining its steady rhythm. The shape was still visible below, unchanged. Everything remained exactly as it had been. But I felt watched now. Not threatened. The sensation was not aggressive or predatory, just observed, noted, as if something was very interested in how I would respond to what I had discovered. I cast off the mooring lines and started the boat's engine. The navigation system powered on automatically despite being switched off. The chart plotter displayed a course back to shore with optimal routing for current and fuel efficiency. I followed the suggested route. It seemed unwise to argue with systems that were demonstrably more capable than they should be. Chapter 6. A second witness who sees less. I was 30 minutes into the return voyage when the radio crackled to life. Company dispatch, calling my vessel identifier. Maintenance 2. This is dispatch. We show you departed Delta 7 station. Confirming completion of scheduled service. I reached for the radio handset. Dispatch Maintenance 2 confirmed. Departing station now. Estimate arrival at dock in 90 minutes. Copy that, Maintenance 2, be advised. Maintenance 4 is being diverted to Delta 7 for supplemental inspection. Technical department flagged your preliminary diagnostics for review. I felt my grip tighten on the handset. Dispatch, what preliminary diagnostics? I have not transmitted any reports yet. A pause. Then Maintenance 2, we show diagnostic upload at 14:23 hours. Standard telemetry data. Technical wants a secondary inspection to verify sensor readings. Maintenance 4 is already en route to 14:23. That was 40 minutes ago while I was still observing the signal patterns. I had not transmitted anything, but something had sent data back to shore using my credentials and equipment. Understood, dispatch. Maintenance 2 continuing to home dock. I switched off the radio before they could respond. Maintenance 4 was Brandon Collier, a technician who had been with the company for 8 months. Competent, by the book, and completely inexperienced with actual anomalies. If something wanted a second observer at Delta 7, someone who would document conditions without recognizing what they were documenting, Brandon was the perfect choice. I increased speed, pushing the workboat harder than normal conditions warranted. I needed to be at the dock when Brandon returned. I needed to compare our observations before anyone else could influence the record. The sun was setting when I secured the boat at the company marina. I offloaded my equipment into the maintenance shop and immediately checked my computer. The internet connection re-established automatically. Within seconds, my maintenance log file updated again. The new entry I had written, the one documenting unauthorized modifications, was gone. The file now showed a routine service report with minor equipment notes and no mention of anomalies whatsoever. I pulled out my handwritten notes and photographed every page with my phone. Then I uploaded the photos to a personal email account unconnected to my work. If the digital records could be altered, paper evidence needed to exist outside the system. Brandon's boat arrived 2 hours later, just after dark. I met him at the dock as he was tying off. "How was Delta 7?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. He shrugged while securing the mooring line. "Standard service, clean bill of health. Actually, cleanest station I have seen in months. 0 errors, perfect calibration. Almost suspicious how well everything was running." "Did you notice anything unusual? Any signals you could not account for?" Brandon paused, thinking. "No, all frequencies normal." "Why? Did you flag something in your report?" "Just curious. Sometimes equipment acts strangely in the afternoon heat." He nodded. "Everything was normal when I was there. Took me under 2 hours actually. Quickest inspection I have done." "Did you check the underwater structure?" "Visual inspection, yeah. Standard biofouling. Nothing remarkable. Water was kind of murky though. Visibility was maybe 20 feet, 30 at most." 20 feet. I had seen clearly down to 70 feet. The water had been dramatically different for him. "Did you run acoustic logs?" I asked. "Just a standard check, all nominal. Marine life activity, boat traffic, nothing unusual." He hefted his equipment bag. "I need to get this gear stored. You doing okay? You seem kind of focused on Delta 7 specifically." "Just thorough," I said. "Good to buy thorough." He nodded and headed toward the maintenance shop. I watched him go, processing what I had just learned. Brandon had been at the same station, hours after me. He had examined the same equipment, looked at the same water, accessed the same diagnostic systems, and he had seen nothing unusual. Not because he was unobservant, but because nothing unusual had been presented to him. The water had been murky for him, clear for me. The acoustic logs had been normal for him, anomalous for me. The equipment had been routine for him, optimized and helpful for me. We had been shown different versions of reality. Whoever or whatever was operating at Delta 7 had the capability to selectively reveal itself. And it had chosen to reveal itself to me while remaining hidden from Brandon. The question was, why? Chapter 7. The Unscheduled Shutdown. 3 days later, I received a notification that Delta 7 had experienced an unscheduled shutdown. The alert came through at 2 a.m, a text message from the automated monitoring system. Station offline. All sensors non-responsive. Duration unknown. Technical team alerted. By morning, the station was back online. The official report described the incident as a power management fault, likely caused by storm conditions affecting the solar array. Systems had automatically rebooted after temporary loss of charging capacity, but there had been no storm. Weather data for the area showed calm conditions throughout the night, and the shutdown duration was listed as exactly 12 minutes, too precise for a random power fault, too brief for a genuine system failure. I checked the timestamps. The shutdown had begun at exactly 0100 hours, military precision timing, and it had ended at 0112. 12 minutes. What could happen in 12 minutes? I thought about the shape beneath the water, the anchor cable that did not reach the seabed, the signal that responded to proximity. What if the shutdown was not a malfunction, but a maintenance window? What if whatever was down there needed the surface equipment offline periodically? I pulled up historical records for Delta 7. Over the previous 5 years, the station had experienced 17 unscheduled shutdowns. Every single one had occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. Every single one had lasted between 10 and 15 minutes. Every single one had been explained as power management issues, sensor faults, or environmental factors. 17 perfect maintenance windows, spaced irregularly throughout 5 years, all explained away as unrelated technical problems. I checked other stations in the monitoring network. None of them showed similar patterns. The occasional genuine failure, yes, but nothing with the mathematical regularity of Delta 7 shutdowns. That station was being serviced, not by human technicians, but by something else, and the shutdowns ensured no telemetry data existed for those brief windows. Whatever happened during those 12 minutes left no official record. I made a decision that would likely end my employment if discovered. I requested the maintenance schedule for the next 3 months, and specifically volunteered for all Delta 7 assignments. If the station was going to experience another shutdown, I wanted to be there when it happened. My supervisor approved the request without question. Delta 7 was not a popular assignment, too far offshore, too routine, too isolated. Most technicians avoided it when possible, which meant I had the station to myself for the foreseeable future. Chapter 8. The Official Explanation. 2 weeks after my initial encounter at Delta 7, I received a formal email from the technical department. Subject line: Delta 7 Service Report. Clarification required. The email was polite, professional, and deeply concerning. It thanked me for my thorough documentation and attention to detail. It noted that my observations had been reviewed by senior technical staff and that several of my findings required contextual clarification. The signal at 927 MHz was identified as harmonics from the acoustic monitoring array, a known issue with the older equipment models. Not interference, not external transmission, just internal system artifacts that occasionally appeared in spectrum analysis, common enough that it was not worth including in standard maintenance bulletins. The equipment optimizations I had observed were attributed to recent firmware improvements deployed across the network, advanced power management protocols that allowed systems to self-correct minor issues. The improvements were functioning exactly as designed. The anchor depth discrepancy was explained as sonar calibration error. The boat's depth finder was overdue for recalibration, which would be scheduled at the next service interval. The specifications for Delta 7 were confirmed accurate. The subsonic tone in acoustic logs was identified as ocean ambient. Noise, specifically ultra-low frequency sound generated by distant tectonic activity, an ocean current interaction with underwater topography. Persistent and detectable with sensitive equipment, but entirely natural. Every observation I had made was addressed. Every anomaly was explained. The explanations were detailed, technically plausible, and delivered with calm certainty. Too calm. The email concluded by commending my vigilance and suggesting that offshore work could sometimes lead to pattern recognition where no patterns existed. Isolation and routine could make ordinary equipment behavior seem unusual. I was encouraged to take a few days off if I felt fatigued. The entire message read like it had been written to check boxes rather than address genuine concerns. I typed a response questioning several of the explanations, specifically the sonar calibration issue and the timing of the firmware updates. I provided additional details from my handwritten notes. The email failed to send, server error. I tried again, same result. I saved the draft and logged out. When I logged back in 20 minutes later, the draft was gone. The company email system showed no record of my attempted response. I printed the original email and filed it with my handwritten documentation. Then I stopped attempting to challenge the official narrative through work channels. If they wanted to explain everything away, let them. I would continue my own investigation independently. Chapter 9. The pattern revealed. Over the next 6 weeks, I serviced Delta 7 4 times. Each visit revealed minor variations on the same themes. The signal was always present, though sometimes more active than others. The equipment always optimized itself in subtle ways. The shape beneath the water remained exactly where it had been, never moving, never changing. And I began to notice patterns in other stations' records. During the quiet hours at the maintenance shop, I pulled historical data for the entire monitoring network, 73 stations spread across 600 miles of coastline. I was looking for anomalies similar to what I had experienced at Delta 7. What I found was a constellation of quiet strangeness. Station Delta 12, positioned 40 miles south of Delta 7, 8 unscheduled shutdowns over 3 years, all between midnight and 3 in the morning. Station Charlie 9, 90 miles northwest. Acoustic logs showing persistent subsonic tones identical to what I had recorded. Station Echo 3, at the northern extent of the network. Multiple maintenance reports mentioning equipment that optimized itself. Explanations attributing it to firmware updates that were supposedly deployed but that no technician remembered installing. 14 stations in total showed similar patterns. Not all of them. Not even most of them. Just enough to be statistically improbable, spread across the network like coordinates on a map. When I plotted their locations, something remarkable emerged. The stations formed a loose chain along the continental shelf, positioned where the ocean floor dropped from shallow coastal depths to the deep ocean basin. Every anomalous station was located at that transition point, where the continental shelf ended and the true deep ocean began. They were marking a boundary. I found maintenance records going back to the network's inception in the late 1990s. The anomalous stations had been anomalous from the beginning. The patterns I was observing were not recent developments. They had been present for 27 years. Someone had built a monitoring network along the continental shelf. They had deployed it under the guise of environmental research, and for nearly 3 decades, that network had been documenting something that was never discussed in official reports. The maintenance windows, the equipment optimizations, the subsonic markers, all of it was communication. Not human to human, but human to something else. A system of regular contact, predictable interaction, sustained presence. We were not monitoring the ocean. We were maintaining a relationship. With what? I had my theories. Submerged intelligence, post-biological entities, human-designed systems that had evolved beyond their original parameters. None of the theories were comforting, but one thing was certain. Whatever was happening at these stations, it had been happening for my entire career. I had serviced dozens of stations over 6 years. How many had I visited that were part of this hidden network? How many times had I been observed without realizing it? The thought was both terrifying and strangely mundane. This was my job. I had been doing it correctly. The only difference now was awareness. Epilogue. What the boy was really doing. I am still employed by Coastal Environmental Monitoring Systems. I still service Delta 7 every 6 to 8 weeks. I still file maintenance reports that describe routine operations and minor equipment adjustments. Nothing has changed, officially. But I understand now what Delta 7 actually is. What all these stations are. They are not observing the ocean. They are servicing something that was already here. Something submerged. Something patient. Something that requires regular contact with the surface, but never breaks that surface itself. The stations provide power. They provide data upload capabilities. They provide a reason for humans to visit predictable locations at regular intervals. They are interface points, service contracts, a maintenance schedule for infrastructure that extends far deeper than the buoy structures visible above water. We think we are monitoring the environment. In reality, we are technicians maintaining systems we do not fully understand for purposes that are never fully explained. And the most disturbing realization, it works. The system functions, the data flows, the relationships persist, no one is harmed, no one is threatened. The arrangement is so perfectly calibrated that most technicians retire without ever noticing anything unusual. I notice, I document, I continue working, because what else is there to do? The official explanations are available for anyone who wants comfort. Firmware updates, sensor artifacts, calibration drift. The narrative is there, complete and professionally presented. But I have my handwritten notes. I have my photographs of the equipment that optimizes itself. I have my memory of water that was clear for me and murky for others. And I have the certainty that comes from proximity, from being close enough to notice what was never meant to stay hidden forever. Some encounters do not arrive from the sky in bright lights and dramatic confrontation. Some encounters have been here all along, patient and methodical, surfacing briefly only when we are positioned exactly close enough to see. The buoys mark the boundary, the stations maintain the connection, and technicians like me service the equipment, one routine maintenance call at a time, never quite understanding what we are really servicing. But understanding is not required for the system to function. It never was.